I'm just trying to convey that whatever happens, there is always going to be wildlife and marvels, unless we're extremely unlucky. So we have to kind of engage with it, enjoy it, protect it. But we can only really do that if we understand why we love it.
Orbiting 250 miles above, the space station provides us with the ultimate view of planet Earth. From this perspective, we ask our guests to engage with 6 questions that orbit around wonder and stories of hopefulness. For the next few minutes, this is our Wonderspace.
Welcome to the 141st episode of the Wonderspace podcast. My name is Steve Cole, and over the past 4 years I have had the privilege of asking the same 6 questions to amazing people from around the world. Questions that orbit around wonder and stories of hopefulness. We started during the COVID lockdown to enlarge people's vision and perspective and remind us that alongside crisis and emergency are always mind-blowing wonders and hopeful stories that have the potential to fuel us and energise us, even in the most challenging of times. Before I introduce our guest this week, here is another 1-minute wonder from our friends at Ask Nature, who are part of the Biomimicry Institute.
The fruit of Polia condensata, a plant native to the forests of Africa, is renowned for its extraordinarily vibrant blue color, giving it the name marbleberry. Unlike other plants that rely on pigments for coloration, marbleberry achieves its striking appearance through a unique microscopic surface structure. The fruit's outer layer contains cells whose walls are composed of spiraling stacks of tiny cellulose fibers. The layers are spaced at distances that match different wavelengths of visible light. When light hits a berry, if the ups and downs of the waves bouncing off different layers align, they amplify each other, making the reflected light appear much more intense. Adding to the effect, the variation in layer thickness from cell to cell causes each cell to reflect different wavelengths of light, resulting in a pixelated or pointillist effect where tiny dots of different shades of blue, green, and purple appear across the surface of the fruit. The curvature of the cells adds to these effects as well, helping to make the color appear vibrant, multi-toned, and almost alive with shifting hues depending on the angle of observation.
For this Wonderspace episode, we orbit around a small town in Wales called Abergavenny, which is home to our guest Fergus Collins. Fergus is a writer, editor, creator, and host of the Plodcast from BBC Countryfile Magazine, an award-winning podcast that wonderfully slows things down and elevates the stories and sounds of nature from around the UK. I hope you enjoy this orbit with myself and Fergus. Fergus, it's great to have you on board a Wonderspace orbit today. You are so welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Steve. Looking forward to the flight.
Yeah, here we go. So for a few years, I have followed the Plodcast, and I love the way that you expand our experience and understanding of the natural world, but in a way that purposely lowers the tone, slows things down, and promotes nature as centre stage. So I'm excited about this time together and to hear how you respond to our 6 questions today.
Well, I'm very flattered that you listen to the podcast. It's been a joy to make, and it's so lovely to get such positive feedback. So thank you.
Yeah, great. So Fergus, from this imaginary window seat on the space station with a panoramic overview of Earth, our first Wonderspace question is, if we could do a fly past over any part of the world that is significant to you, which place, city or country would it be and why?
This is actually very easy for me to answer, despite I've travelled widely, but I would stay fairly close to home. I love the chalk downlands of Wessex, Old Wessex, Wiltshire, Dorset, Hampshire, Berkshire. They are sensuous, strange places, eerily shaped by layers of humanity over many, many, many centuries, thousands of years. And some of them, well, you get the burial mounds, the barrows, you get the marks of agricultural buildings or mysterious ritual sites. And I love that eerie, evocative sense I get when I'm walking through these places. Now, they're also fabulous for wildlife. Chalk Downland is spectacular for wildflowers. I love the blue butterflies and other creatures that come there, but also you get the skylarks and yellowhammers and corn buntings, lots of other creatures. It's a land we don't experience very much. A lot of it is heavily farmed, but when I'm out there, and I don't live there, but I like to fly over it. A very, very good photographer called James Abraham has a fantastic Instagram account of flying over these landscapes. So I indulge when I'm far away, but it's my spiritual home, and I like to wander amongst these ancient sites and imagine. Well, I don't have to imagine; it just comes so naturally. They're so evocative. These old ditches and scrapes and dikes and mounds and weird things, and I imagine the restless spirits, and I get very excited when I'm there, and perhaps excited talking about it.
That's so good. So good. I thought you were going to go for a Sugarloaf, which is your local elevated view. I'm sure that's up there in the top 5.
It's very good. And I live right at the foot of Sugarloaf. It's a fantastic, beautiful mountain and has ancient marks and sites on it. But I'm a recent comer to this landscape of the Banau Brechinnog, the Brecon Beacons. So I'm still finding my way here. It's full of marvels. In many ways, perhaps more beautiful than the downland landscapes I was talking of, more varied, certainly. But I've never quite found that eerie big skies and strange connection with the past that sort of Wessex landscape has.
Yeah, that's a great start. Wonderful. So our second question focuses on you and your story. So Fergus, give us a glimpse into your life story so far with an emphasis on what you're doing currently.
Well, I was lucky enough to grow up in the countryside and was given quite a free run as a child. So it was sort of be back for tea time. And then I'd have these great days where I had several siblings. There were 3 siblings, and we'd go off and have adventures. And I think in that, a love of countryside, a love of nature, a love of hiding out, escaping the eyes of adults was imbued in me. So later I sort of developed a love of words and a love of writing, love of editing. And I thought the idea of being a book editor and writer sounded really great. So I worked quite hard towards that. And I became a book editor and later a bit of a writer. And I moved from books to magazines, where I worked on BBC Wildlife Magazine as the features editor. So these two loves converged in this fantastic job. And then from there, I became the editor of BBC Countryfile Magazine, which enabled me to not just wildlife, it's history, it's culture, it's food, it's farming, it's all aspects, music, folklore, all aspects of life are under the Countryfile banner. And for 14 years, I did that. But over the last couple of years, I found that perhaps I wasn't getting back quite as much as I was putting into it, in terms of it couldn't possibly give back the amount of effort that I had to put. But I had started up as a bit of a project, as a bit of a sideline, the Plodcast, which is sort of the magazine in audio form, but led by me. Walks, sometimes with guests, sometimes alone, immersing and trying to share that sense of belonging and love of nature and the surprises that you get along the way. And it sort of emerged. And as I was fortunate enough to be offered redundancy, the Plodcast stayed with me. And for the last, it's been a year since I left Countryfile Magazine as editor, but I'm still very connected to the brand and plodcasting every week, sometimes several times a week.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. I'm sort of enjoying when people tell me it's been a miserable summer and autumn. I think Well, I seem to have been out on lots of sunny days, so it's the joy of the joy of being flexible.
That's wonderful. What you are doing with the Plodcast is so brilliantly and profoundly simple. You are literally holding up a microphone to nature and inviting us to slow down, to listen, to be aware of birdsong, the sound of water making its way to the ocean. It's the rustle of leaves in woodland. It's like waking up to what is around us. And I'm so thrilled that the Plodcast has been recognised with all kinds of industry awards. And but do you remember where originally this idea came from? What was the kind of the seed of where the Plodcast started?
It was birdsong. Birdsong is what my one sort of super skill. I can recognise a lot of bird songs, most British bird songs. I'm always surprised by a few calls, and when I travel to perhaps the Fens or the north of Scotland where I'm not familiar with the birds, that's really exciting. Suddenly there's all these new voices. But I thought I'd take my phone out one day and record a walk with all the birds. It was May the 3rd, 2013, and I walked from my home up in the woods, up onto a hill, through lots of different habitats, and must have found about 30 or 40 species, ending with a cuckoo. And I listened back and it sounded quite good, so I put it on the website as a proto-podcast. And a very good friend of mine said how much she loved it. And it meant a lot to me that this person said she loved it. So I thought I'd make some more. And then finally got round to making them every single week. And it evolved. The Plodcast name evolved as a joke, from a joke, as I'm plodding around podcasting, and eventually it's sort of just, I'm reliably told there's a police podcast called Plodcast as well, which
brilliant.
Which sounds good, and which I must listen to. But we are the Plodders.
So good, and it's clear that we are in a climate and biodiversity emergency. How is this crisis impacting you personally, and also your editorial decisions as well with the Plodcast?
It breaks my heart all the time, because although I know where to find abundant nature and I can still find wonders and marvels, there isn't the same amount as when I was a child. Certainly not butterflies, and there's lots of creatures have, red kites, and we now have white-tailed eagles being reintroduced all over the place. We've got certain species doing really well, but generally the base level of creatures that I'm familiar with, that I would catch in ponds or just love to see on every single walk on the downland. I love that. Just the numbers have declined so much. In terms of, it can be a pretty miserable message and very difficult to get people to engage if I sort of walk around going, well, there used to be a hedgerow here, or there used to be a woodland, and when I was a lad, this was all ponds. I think I'm just trying to convey that whatever happens, there is always going to be wildlife and marvels, unless we're extremely unlucky. So we have to kind of engage with it, enjoy it, protect it. But we can only really do that if we understand why we love it, and why it's much more fun and makes much more sense to go for a walk and enjoy. I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. If I have to choose between going to the cinema or going for a walk along a river where I know I'm going to see, who knows what, it could be it's an ever-changing cast of incredible, and I always see something that I will come home and write down. That was an odd little thing happened today. I saw a heron eat a rat. And I find it fills my tank. It makes me optimistic. It is endlessly fascinating as well, and curious and strange and sometimes creepy.
Our third question of 6 is around rest. I don't know whether you are good at rest, but our third question is, where is your place of reset or recharge? Well, I've
recently spent a bit of time fishing, and it's not something I ever really did as a kid. I've been working on the Plodcast with someone called Kevin Parr, who's a fantastic writer and angler, and also just a very patient man to spend time fishing with. And he's imbued with me this sense that you can just sit by a canal, an unpromising canal, and drop a line in. And if you want to catch something, you actually bait the line. But quite often it's just, I found it very, very restful and very mindful. And suddenly all your existence is on just the tip of the float. All your attention is on that. And weirdly mindful, it's not a weirdly, it's a well-known mindful experience, but I have only recently found that. So I'm quite good at resting. I'm quite good at sort of escaping and just sitting beside. Water is always the place I would go to when I need to recharge. And actually the fishing element has stopped me reaching for my phone, which is also a fun, my hands are full, my eyes are full. I don't need any sort of dopamine hit from checking the Plodcast stats, or if anyone's been, if any guest has been in touch to say they'd like to come on board, or whatever. All these things that are wonderful, but not particularly sustaining. Even just not picking up the phone is a rest. Yeah,
and one of the recent Plodcast, you were searching for white-tailed eagles on the Isle of Harris in the Outer Hebrides, which was absolutely stunning episode. And so I recognise with all these experiences that you've had, our fourth question is going to be a real challenge. But Fergus, what wonder of the natural world excites you the most?
I actually find this, it is hard to answer this. It's not that I could list many things that I've seen, which starling murmurations are endlessly, I could never tire of them. But I do think it's, as I mentioned, I think water, I'm drawn to water, and I'm drawn to wherever I've had a garden, I've dug a pond, and that's 4 places now, soon to be 5. And I'm just astonished how quickly life appears in something I've dug, and I've planted it, and I've tried to make it as natural and as appealing. But even so, I'm surprised at the generosity of nature that turns up, and suddenly there's water boatmen, and then there's pond skaters, and then there's a frog, and then there's dragonfly larvae, and the whole thing becomes this mini water hole. It is a watering hole, and birds will bathe in the margins. That's endless. So I can't pass a bridge over a river without looking in to see if there's any fish below. It's not that I'm obsessed, but I do find it quite fascinating that there's this whole world that most people are oblivious to, and yet it's beautiful and incredible.
Yeah,
where it's not polluted.
Exactly. So, in the terms of elevated views, would there be a standout place in your travels that you know, a euphoric moment that you've experienced from a place of elevation?
Oh my goodness. It would definitely be Sullivan, which is a mountain in Assynt in northern Scotland, which I climbed for a Plodcast, 2021. And I didn't realise I had vertigo until I reached the top of this ascent, the ascent in Assynt. It's not a hugely there are taller Brecon Beacons than Sullivan, but it goes straight from sea level straight up to 790 metres.
Wow.
And you do all that in one fell swoop. And it's not quite hands and knees, but you get to the top and there's just this thin ridge. And on the other side, it's just a drop into nothingness. And I'm just thinking of it now. And at the time I was recording and I reached the top and there were 2 ring ouzels, which are very, very hard to find these days, singing around my head. And I thought, I couldn't care less about these ring ouzels.
Yeah.
I was clinging on. I did capture the sound of these birds, but I was clinging on and had to sort of crawl my way across this tiny ledge to a broad cricket pitch size top of the mountain.
Wow.
But it was just this little clamber through, which even now I'm just getting slight chills. And my 2 friends who I with are sort of dancing around going, I don't know what you're worried about, Fergus, but the views were just incredible. And although we didn't see eagles, you could see out to the Summer Isles and all these magical, and the locks below that we had been fishing on just looked like tiny little puddles below. And I thought, in Britain, you can find this, and this isn't a particularly tall or difficult mountain. So yeah, I'd like to do quite a lot more of that at some stage when I get the chance.
Here we go. We have 2 more questions, and our 5th question takes the focus onto someone else. So what is your hopeful story that's not your own about a person, business or non-profit who are doing amazing things for the world? So who would you love to give a shout out to today?
I was going to go down the rewilding route, which I know lots of people have trouble with the word rewilding, but I find it I just did, rewilding. I think it's just a marvellous thing that's happening, that we're bringing nature back in a sensitive, landscape-friendly way. However, I met Hamza Yassin last week for a future Plodcast, and I know he's a TV star in my eyes. He won Strictly Come Dancing. He's a wildlife cameraman. But I chatted to him. I found him profoundly moving. It was a really great conversation we had. And he had a lot of genuinely great advice about, he's a young man, but he's wise, and about how you not following your dreams so much, but just determination and grit and not giving up. I found he's got a message there for a lot of people. And in a time, you mentioned earlier, time of climate chaos and a lot of despair in the natural world, he's a very, very positive figure. And I mean, I'm not trying to advertise future podcasts, but I did come away quite elated by meeting this guy. And I think he will have a lot of power in years to come through this message. Quite a simple but profoundly useful message about making the most of your life and and helping the wild where you can.
Brilliant. Are you seeing a movement emerging of mavericks who are pioneering nature solutions and innovation? Are you seeing those kind of mavericks coming through?
Definitely, there are mavericks out there for sure. There are lots of people, and I can't name any of them. Not that I've forgotten their names, but I just dare not name them. But there are people who are, I think, fed up with waiting for change, who are taking change upon themselves. Whether that is it's sort of do something and apologize later approach. It might be to do with pushing forward reintroductions of certain species or rewilding of landscapes, or just experimenting on their own land and doing things in an unorthodox way, which neighbours will... I mean, we've obviously got the example of Knepp, which is so well known, the Knepp estate in Sussex, where they are many years into a rewilding project. It's so incredibly inspiring, and they're incredibly inspiring people. But this is happening on smaller scales and bigger scales in less heralded places. And it takes people with a maverick attitude who are prepared, because we're very socially conservative in the countryside. I think we're quite resistant to change. So people who change the way land has been farmed, even changing to a new crop, the neighbours will frown upon it. There'll be words in the pub if the pub's still in existence. There will be mutterings, and it's quite difficult. It is having lived in cities and the countryside in many, many different places, comparing the two, it's fascinating to see the different attitudes. Yeah.
Fergus, this has been such an inspiring orbit. But as we draw our time to a close and prepare to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, what insight, wisdom, or question would you like to leave with us?
I'm not going to leave an enigmatic question. I mean, gosh, wisdom. There's some things I've learnt which may be helpful. I think the most important is patience. Of all the things that we rush, we worry, and we rush to sort things, or to, let's say, with my work since leaving Countryfile Magazine, I've been in a process of just trying to calm myself down and not dash to things have fallen into place. Things do fall into place if you give it a chance. I think that's also the case with when we make decisions. This is something that was taught to me recently, and I wish I'd learnt this 40 years ago. But we make decisions generally when we're in a bad place, in a bad mood, when we're feeling down, because we want to change things for the better as quickly as possible. but it's absolutely the worst time to make a decision. A low moment will pass, and then it's making the choice to when you're feeling good, you've got to make the tough decisions. That's the time to do it. And that is actually incredibly helpful advice. It's not mine. It's advice that was given to me by someone I know. And it's been very useful, because being patient, waiting out the bad time, and then make a better decision based on your sort of natural inner wisdom when all the sort of clouds have disappeared. That's the sort of, without going too woo-woo about it, I think that's so helpful. I think it's been helpful to me. So
that's great. Thank you, Fergus, for engaging with our 6 questions in such a brilliant way. So for people wanting to find out more about you, books, Plodcast, where is the best place to find out more?
Well, the Plodcast is on all the various channels, Spotify, Apple. I've just actually completed a book with John Craven called Countryfile: A Year in the Countryside. So there's a little bit of me in that.
Thanks again for helping us to re-wonder today. And I ask, on behalf of myself and so many people around the country and maybe around the world, please, Fergus, keep Plodcasting. We really appreciate it. It's really important.
I would love to, and I will endeavour to do so.
I hope you enjoyed this inspiring orbit with Fergus. The transcript, together with all the organisational links, can be found on Fergus's episode page at ourwonder.space. Finally, I would love to draw your attention to a new networking platform that we have launched to enable everyone to engage with our 5th question on Wonderspace. A networking platform called Someone Else that connects us through the way that we share hopeful stories about someone else. Go to someoneelse.space, create a simple profile, and upload your story. Thanks again to Fergus and to you for listening.